The October sun cast long shadows across Route 66 as it cut through Redemption Springs like an aging artery from another America. The light caught on chrome bumpers and weathered signs, painting them gold for one glorious moment before the coming dusk. Jack Harrington stood outside his garage, a cup of coffee cooling in his weathered hands, watching the world with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. At 65, Jack still moved like a man who remembered what it meant to be a Marine. His broad shoulders remained square under a faded work shirt, and despite the gray in his close-cropped hair, few men in town would consider crossing him. 40 years removed from military service, and 15 years since hanging up his badge as a military police officer, Jack had found his peace here among the engines and ghosts of America's past. Classic Cars of Route 66 was more than a business. The converted gas station with its restored pumps and neon sign had become a sanctuary. Inside, Chevelles and Mustangs from another era slept under careful restoration, their engines temporarily silent, but promising resurrection. Jack ran his fingers along the hood of a 1965 Shelby GT350, the metal cool and smooth beneath his touch. In these machines, unlike people, perfection was still possible with enough patience and the right tools. The bell above the door jingled softly. Jack didn't need to look up to know it was Sarah Miller. Her footsteps had a particular rhythm, purposeful but light, like everything about the young woman. "Brought you a slice of Martha's apple pie," she said, setting down a plate on the workbench. "You missed lunch again." Sarah worked at Liberty Diner next door, a chrome and neon establishment with red vinyl booths that had served hungry travelers since 1958. At 22, she possessed a quiet dignity that reminded Jack of his late wife, Eleanor. The same gentle determination in the eyes, the same refusal to be broken by circumstance. "Been wrestling with this carburetor all morning," Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Lost track of time." Sarah smiled, but Jack caught the exhaustion behind it. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her Liberty Diner uniform hung a little looser than it had last month. She was working double shifts again. "How's your father today?" Jack asked, knowing the answer wouldn't be good. Sarah's smile faltered. "Same. The new medication isn't helping much with the nightmares. He had another episode this morning." Frank Miller had served with Jack in a classified special operations unit in the 1980s. They had deployed together on missions so classified that most of their files remained redacted decades later. But it was Operation Desert Ghost in 1908 that had broken Frank. A hostage rescue mission in the Middle East gone catastrophically wrong, with consequences that had followed them home like faithful shadows. "I'll stop by the hospital tomorrow," Jack promised. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "And I want you to take this." Sarah recognized the routine and shook her head. "Jack, you've done enough. It's just an advance on the work Frank promised to help me with when he gets better." Jack lied the same lie he told every month. They both knew Frank would never work on engines again, not with his hands shaking the way they did now. The tremors had started 5 years ago, followed by the confusion, then the angry outbursts as his mind began its slow betrayal. Sarah took the envelope reluctantly. The hospital bills had been mounting since her father's stroke 3 weeks ago, adding to the already crippling cost of his ongoing psychiatric care. Jack knew she was working herself to exhaustion between the diner night classes at the community college and hospital visits. "One day I'm going to pay you back," she said. "Every penny." Jack nodded, though they both knew he would never accept it. After Sarah left, Jack locked up the garage and walked across the street to his small apartment above the town's old hardware store. The space was Spartan, but comfortable, decorated with framed photographs and military memorabilia. He paused before a picture of his son Michael in full military dress. The boy had followed in his footsteps, now serving in special operations somewhere in the Middle East. Jack hadn't heard from him in 3 months, but no news was good news in their line of work. He fixed himself a simple dinner and ate at the kitchen table while watching the evening light fade over Main Street. Route 66 had been the artery of American dreams, once pulsing with travelers and commerce. Now it was just another forgotten vein bypassed by interstate highways and modern convenience. Redemption Springs was dying a slow death with more vacant storefronts each year. Only Jack's garage, the Liberty Diner, and a handful of other businesses stubbornly remained. As darkness fell completely, Jack heard the familiar rumble of motorcycles approaching. The low growl of American engines echoed through town, announcing the arrival of the last patrol. Jack grabbed his jacket and headed downstairs. 5 Harley-Davidsons pulled into the parking lot of Liberty Diner, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The riders dismounted with the careful movements of men whose bodies had begun to betray them, but whose pride wouldn't acknowledge it. Robert Chief Thompson led the group, his imposing 6'4" frame, unmistakable even in the dim light. At 68, the former sniper still moved with predatory grace, his Native American heritage evident in his high cheekbones and long gray hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Beside him stood Mike "Doc" Anderson, a former combat medic whose gentle hands had saved countless lives on and off the battlefield. William "Billy" Cooper came next, the ex-explosives expert whose fingers, now gnarled with arthritis, could still dismantle an engine and reassemble it blindfolded. The other 2 riders, Tommy "Irish" Sullivan and Ray "Preacher" Jackson, completed the group. They had all served together in the same classified unit, bound by experiences they rarely discussed but could never escape. Jack Chief nodded as they approached. "How's business?" "Slow but steady," Jack replied, clasping the man's van. "You boys hungry?" Always Irish grinned, patting his substantial belly. "Martha's still making that meatloaf on Thursdays." "Some things in Redemption Spring never change," Jack said, leading them toward the diner. The Liberty Diner glowed like a beacon against the night, its neon sign humming with an electric blue promise. Inside, the evening crowd was sparse, mostly locals nursing coffees and a few truckers passing through. Sarah moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her smile professional but tired. "The usual booth, gentlemen?" she asked as they entered, already reaching for menus. "You're a sight for sore eyes, little lady," Doc said warmly. "How's your old man doing?" Sarah's smile tightened slightly. "He's fighting." "Tough as nails, your father," Chief said. "Always was." They settled into the large corner booth that had become theirs over the years. Martha, the 60-year-old owner of the diner, emerged from the kitchen to greet them personally. Her ample figure and no-nonsense demeanor commanded respect even from these hardened veterans. "About time you troublemakers showed up," she said with affection. "Coffee's fresh, and I saved some meatloaf for you vultures." The men ordered their usual meals while Jack sipped coffee and listened to their road stories. The last patrol still rode together at least once a month, visiting veterans' hospitals and raising money for military families in need. It was their way of continuing service long after their country had forgotten their sacrifices. As they ate, Jack noticed Chief watching the television mounted in the corner. A news report showed Senator Richard Hayes at a campaign rally, his distinguished silver hair and confident smile projecting trustworthiness to the assembled crowd. "That son of a bitch is talking about running for president," Chief said quietly. The table fell silent. Senator Hayes was a name they all knew too well. As a young State Department official in the 1980s, he had been involved in authorizing Operation Desert Ghost. When the mission failed catastrophically, Hayes had been instrumental in the cover-up that followed, sacrificing the reputations of men like Frank Miller to protect political careers. "They say his son is following in Daddy's footsteps," Billy added. "Real estate developer with political ambitions. Been buying up property all along Route 66, turning small towns into tourist traps." Jack nodded. "I've heard rumors he's looking at Redemption Springs next." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but an undercurrent of tension remained. These men had learned the hard way that the past never stayed buried, no matter how deep you dug the hole. After dinner, the last patrol prepared to continue their journey. They had rooms reserved at a motel 20 miles down the road and wanted to reach it before midnight. As they settled their bill, Doc pulled Jack aside. "Frank's medical reports came back," he said quietly, having used his connections at the VA hospital to check on their friend. "The damage from the stroke is extensive, Jack. Even if the insurance covered everything, which it won't." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jack understood what wasn't being said. Frank Miller was fighting a battle he couldn't win against enemies, both inside and outside his broken mind. "Sarah doesn't know yet," Jack said. "The doctors are waiting for more tests." Doc squeezed his shoulder. "That girl has her father's strength, but everybody has a breaking point." The roar of unfamiliar engines interrupted their conversation. Through the diner's large windows, they watched as 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. The vehicles were expensive and out of place in Redemption Springs, their tinted windows and gleaming exteriors speaking of wealth and privilege. The last patrol exchanged glances. Outsiders like these usually meant trouble of one kind or another. The door to the diner opened, and a group of well-dressed young men entered, led by an older man in an impeccable suit. Maxwell Hayes had his father's distinguished features softened by wealth and entitlement. At 45, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Behind him, his son Ethan and four friends looked around the diner with undisguised contempt. Martha approached them with menus. "Welcome to Liberty Diner. Table for 6. Maxwell smiled thinly. "That would be fine, thank you." They were seated at a large table in the center of the diner. Jack and the last patrol watched silently as Sarah approached to take their orders. Her professional smile never wavered, though the young men made little effort to hide their disdain for the small-town establishment. "What can I get for you gentlemen this evening?" she asked. Ethan Hayes looked up at her with cold eyes. At 20, he had his father's good looks corrupted by arrogance and a lifetime of privilege. His friends snickered as he made a show of examining the menu. "What's good here?" "Anything that won't give us food poisoning," he asked loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. Sarah's smile remained fixed. "The meatloaf is our Thursday special. Very popular." "I'll take a burger," Ethan said dismissively. "Medium rare, and try not to mess it up." His friends ordered similarly, each interaction laced with condescension. Maxwell said nothing to correct his son's behavior, instead studying a folder of documents he had brought with him. Jack felt Chief tense beside him and placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not yet," he murmured. Sarah brought their food 15 minutes later, balancing the heavy plates with practiced skill. As she set Ethan's burger in front of him, he made a show of inspecting it with disgust. "I said medium rare. This looks like shoe leather," he complained. "I'm sorry about that," Sarah replied evenly. "I can hug it back and have the cook prepare another one." Ethan exchanged glances with his friends, then leaned back in his chair with a smirk. Without warning, he spat directly onto Sarah's apron. "Maybe that will improve the flavor," he said. The diner went completely silent. Sarah stood frozen, her face flushing with humiliation as she wiped at the spittle on her uniform. For a moment, no one moved. Then Chief stood up. The scrape of his chair against the floor seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. One by one, the other members of the last patrol rose as well, their movements deliberate and synchronized by decades of shared experience. Jack was the last to stand, his eyes never leaving Maxwell Hayes. "Apologize to the lady," Chief said, his voice deadly quiet. Ethan looked up, his smirk faltering, as he took in the 5 imposing figures approaching their table. These weren't the harmless old men he had dismissed upon entering. Something in their eyes told him he had made a serious miscalculation. "Mind your own business, old man," one of Ethan's friends said, half rising from his seat. Billy Cooper placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and pushed him firmly back down. "He wasn't talking to you, son." Maxwell Hayes finally looked up from his documents, assessing the situation with cold calculation. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Jack stepped forward, his gaze locked with Maxwell's. "Your boy just disrespected a lady in our establishment. Where I come from, that requires an apology." Recognition flickered in Maxwell's eyes. "Harrington," he said softly. "Jack Harrington. Well, this is an unexpected reunion." Jack showed no surprise that Hayes knew him. "The apology, Mr. Hayes. Then you and your party can finish your meal in peace." Maxwell studied Jack for a moment, then turned to his son. "Ethan apologized to the waitress." Ethan looked at his father in disbelief. "You can't be serious. Do you know who these people are?" "Better than you do," Maxwell replied evenly. "Apologize. Now." Something in his father's tone made Ethan reconsider his position. He looked up at Sarah, his expression sullen. "Sorry," he muttered without conviction. "Not good enough," Doc said. "Stand up. Look her in the eye like a man." Ethan glanced at his father, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Slowly, he stood and faced Sarah. "I apologize for my behavior, miss. It was inappropriate." Sarah nodded stiffly, her professional mask firmly in place. "Apology accepted. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare another burger?" "That won't be necessary," Maxwell interjected smoothly. "In fact, I believe we're finished here." He placed several $100 bills on the table. "For the inconvenience." He stood and buttoned his jacket, motioning for Ethan and his friends to follow. As they prepared to leave, Maxwell paused beside Jack. "We should catch up, Harrington. I'm in town on business for the next few weeks. I think we might have matters of mutual interest to discuss." Jack's expression revealed nothing. This is a small town, Mr. Hayes. I'm sure we'll run into each other. Maxwell smiled thinly. Indeed. Give my regards to Frank Miller if he's still lucid enough to remember me. The implied threat hung in the air as Maxwell led his party out of the diner. Through the windows, they watched as the group climbed into their SUVs and drove away into the night. You know him, Chief said. It wasn't a question. Jack nodded slowly. I know what he is. Sarah approached their table, her composure intact but her hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry about that, gentlemen. Thank you for stepping in. Sit down for a minute, honey, Martha said, guiding Sarah into a chair. Those rich boys are gone now. The last patrol returned to their booth, but the easy camaraderie of earlier had evaporated. Jack remained standing watching the road where the SUVs had disappeared. They're coming for Redemption Springs, he said finally. Hayes wouldn't be here otherwise. What exactly happened between you and Hayes? Irish asked. Jack turned to face his old comrades. Operation Desert Ghost. Maxwell was a junior liaison between state and defense back then. He knew what his father did to Frank to all of us. And now he's here, Chief said grimly. Not a coincidence, Doc added. Jack looked around the diner at the worn but comfortable furnishings, the faded photographs of Route 66 in its heyday, the small community that had given him purpose after Eleanor died. This place had saved him when nothing else could, and now it was threatened. I need to check on Sarah's father, Jack said. You boys still staying at the Sunset Motel? Chief nodded. We'll be around for a few days. Seems like our old commander might need his patrol back. After the last patrol departed, Jack drove his pickup truck to St. Luke's Hospital on the edge of town. Visiting hours were technically over, but Nurse Wilson had served with Doc in Desert Storm and made exceptions for Jack. Frank Miller's room was dim, illuminated only by the glow of monitoring equipment and a small bedside lamp. The once powerfully built man now looked small against the white hospital sheets, tubes, and wires connecting him to machines that beeped softly in the quiet room. Jack sat in the chair beside the bed and studied his old friend's face. The stroke had affected the left side, pulling Frank's mouth into a permanent downward slope. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow but steady. Hayes is in town, Jack said quietly. Both of them, looking to cause trouble, same as always. Frank's eyes remained closed, but his right hand twitched slightly on the blanket. Don't worry about Sarah. We're looking after her. Jack reached out and gripped his friend's hand. And I haven't forgotten my promise. That night, Jack dreamed of the desert. The oppressive heat, the weight of his equipment, the tension before everything went catastrophically wrong. In the dream, as in reality, he was too late to save the hostages. Too late to stop the explosion. Too late to prevent Frank from being captured. He woke at dawn drenched in sweat despite the October chill. The dreams had been less frequent in recent years, but Hayes's appearance had dragged everything back to the surface. After a quick shower and strong coffee, Jack opened his garage at 6:30 as he did every morning. Work was the best distraction from memories that refused to stay buried. He lost himself in the familiar rhythm of rebuilding a transmission for a 1970 Dodge Challenger, his hands remembering what his mind would rather forget. The morning passed quietly until the rumble of approaching motorcycles announced the return of the last patrol. They parked their bikes in front of the garage and dismounted with the stiffness of men who had spent too many hours on the road. Thought you boys would be halfway to Arizona by now, Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag. Change of plans, Chief replied. We made some calls this morning. Hayes Development Corporation has been buying properties all along Route 66. They're turning small towns like this into luxury tourist destinations. Redemption Springs is next on their list, Billy added. They've already bought the old textile factory and 3 vacant stores on Main Street. Jack nodded grimly. Martha mentioned someone made an offer on the diner last month. She turned them down. They'll be back with a better offer, Doc said. Or worse, with threats. I already got one, Jack admitted, telling them about his late-night visit to Frank's hospital room. I checked this morning. Hayes Development owns the hospital management company. They could transfer Frank to a state facility city anytime they want. The implications hung heavily in the air. State facilities were notoriously understaffed and ill-equipped to handle patients with Frank's complex needs. It would be a death sentence. So what's the play, Commander? Chief asked, falling naturally into the old chain of command. Before Jack could answer, Sarah's pickup truck screeched to a halt outside the garage. She jumped out, her face pale with anger and fear. They're going to cut off Dad's treatment, she said without preamble. The insurance company denied the latest claim, and the hospital administrator says we have to move him or start paying cash. Jack exchanged glances with the last patrol. When end of next week unless we can come up with $30,000. Sarah's voice broke. They said his condition isn't showing enough improvement to justify continued care. This is Hayes, Jack said, putting pressure on us. Sarah looked confused. The men from last night. Why would they care about my father? Jack hesitated. Sarah knew her father had served in special operations, but Frank had never shared the details of Operation Desert Ghost with his daughter. Some burdens weren't meant to be passed down. It's complicated, Jack said finally. Your father and I have history with the Hayes family. Bad history. What kind of history gets my father kicked out of the hospital? Sarah demanded. Before Jack could formulate an answer, the familiar black SUVs appeared at the end of the street. They parked in front of the garage in a display of casual dominance. Maxwell Hayes emerged from the lead vehicle alone this time. He approached with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way, an expensive leather portfolio tucked under one arm. His tailored suit and Italian shoes were ludicrously out of place against the backdrop of Jack's modest garage. Mr. Harrington, he greeted smoothly, I hoped we might have a chance to talk business today. Jack stepped forward, positioning himself between Hayes and Sarah. What kind of business? Maxwell smiled without warmth. The lucrative kind, for both of us. He glanced at the last patrol. Perhaps somewhere more private. Anything you have to say can be said in front of my friends, Jack replied. As you wish. Maxwell opened his portfolio and removed several glossy renderings. Redemption Springs has so much untapped potential. Route 66 nostalgia is very marketable to the right demographic. The renderings showed a transformed Main Street with boutique shops, upscale restaurants, and luxury accommodations replacing the current businesses. Classic cars of Route 66 was notably absent, replaced by a gleaming museum of vintage automobiles. We're prepared to offer you 3 times the market value for your property, Maxwell continued. Enough to retire comfortably, Mr. Harrington. Perhaps somewhere with better medical facilities for old friends. The implication was clear. Jack studied the man's face, searching for any trace of the idealistic State Department liaison he had known briefly in the 1980s. There was nothing left but ambition and calculation. Not interested, then, Jack said flatly. Maxwell's smile tightened. I urge you to reconsider. Development is coming to Redemption Springs with or without your cooperation. Better to profit from the inevitable than to be crushed by it. Is that a threat? Chief asked, stepping forward. Merely an observation, Maxwell replied smoothly. Change comes for us all, gentlemen, even aging heroes of forgotten wars. He turned to Sarah. Miss Miller, I believe I was sorry to hear about your father's recent setback. Such a shame that his insurance claim was denied. Sarah stiffened. How did you know about that? I make it my business to be informed about matters that might affect my investments. Maxwell placed the renderings back in his portfolio. The hospital administrator is a personal friend. Perhaps I could put in a word, arrange an extension for your father's care. In exchange for what? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Your property, of course, and your support at the town council meeting next week when we present our development plan. Maxwell checked his expensive watch. Think it over. I'll need your answer by tomorrow afternoon. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and my son would like to apologize properly for his behavior last night. He can be impulsive, but he's not a bad young man. Perhaps sometime in a more wholesome environment would do him good. What does that mean? Sarah asked. Ethan will be staying in Redemption Springs to oversee the initial property acquisitions. I thought perhaps he might benefit from seeing how ordinary Americans live. Maxwell's smile was calculated. In fact, I wonder if Liberty Diner might be willing to employ him temporarily. A learning experience, you might say. Jack exchanged glances with his friends. This was no random suggestion. Why would Martha hire him? Sarah asked suspiciously. Because I'll make it worth her while, Maxwell replied. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. My son learns the value of honest work, and your employer receives generous compensation. After Maxwell departed, Jack turned to Sarah. He's playing us. Obviously, she replied. But why? What does any of this have to do with my father? Jack sighed heavily. The past was finally catching up to all of them. It's time you knew the truth about Operation Desert Ghost and what really happened to your father. Inside the garage office, Jack pulled an old metal box from behind a loose panel in the wall. From it, he removed a yellowed envelope sealed with tape. Your father wanted you to have this if anything ever happened to him, Jack said, handing it to Sarah. He made me promise to keep it safe. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. All these years, and he never told me what really happened over there. He was protecting you, Chief said gently. Some burdens aren't meant to be shared. But now I need to know, Sarah insisted, especially if it's why these people are threatening us. Jack nodded. Operation Desert Ghost, Middle East 1988. Hostage rescue mission gone wrong. The official record says your father disobeyed orders, causing the deaths of 3 American hostages and 7 team members. That's a lie, Doc interjected fiercely. Frank was a scapegoat. The truth, Jack continued, is that Senator Hayes, then a State Department official, authorized the mission, then ordered it aborted at the last minute for political reasons. We were already in position when the abort order came. Frank refused to leave the hostages behind. Sarah looked down at the envelope in her hands. So he did disobey orders. To save innocent lives, Billy said. The explosion wasn't his fault. Intelligence was wrong about the location, wrong about the security. Everything went to hell, but Frank got 2 hostages out alive before he was captured. He spent 3 months in enemy hands, Chief added quietly. By the time we got him back, Hayes and his people had already established the official narrative. Frank was blamed, our unit was disbanded, and most of the records were classified or destroyed. Sarah opened the envelope with unsteady fingers. Inside was a handwritten account of the operation along with several photographs and what appeared to be an original operation order signed by Richard Hayes. This would destroy Senator Hayes if it ever came out, she whispered, understanding dawning. And now his son is here trying to buy our silence along with the property. Jack nodded grimly. Maxwell was there too as a junior liaison. He knows exactly what his father did, and he's been covering for him ever since. So what do we do? Sarah asked. Before Jack could answer, Martha burst into the garage, her face flushed with anger. That Hayes fellow just came to the diner, she announced. Offered me 3 times what the place is worth, and when I told him it wasn't for sale, he threatened to have the health department shut me down over violations. Did you take his offer? Doc asked. Martha snorted. My daddy built that diner in 1958, and his name is still on the deed. No amount of money could make me sell it to those vultures. They're moving fast, Jack observed, trying to lock up the whole town before anyone can organize opposition. The sound of another vehicle approaching drew their attention. A taxi pulled up outside, and Ethan Hayes stepped out, looking decidedly uncomfortable. He paid the driver and stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, holding a small duffel bag. Now what? Billy muttered. Ethan approached the garage slowly, his arrogance from the previous night replaced by obvious discomfort. Mr. Harrington, my father said I should report to you. Jack studied the young man with undisguised skepticism. Report for what, exactly? He says I'm supposed to work here, and at the diner. Ethan shifted uneasily. Something about learning respect and the value of honest work. Jack exchanged glances with the last patrol and Martha. Maxwell's strategy was becoming clearer. Place his son in their midst as both a bargaining chip and a spy. And if we refuse to babysit you, Chief asked bluntly. Ethan shrugged. My father said to tell you that Miss Miller's father would immediately be transferred to the state facility in Carson City. Sarah stepped forward, anger flashing in her eyes. You people are unbelievable, using a sick man as leverage. I'm just delivering the message, Ethan said defensively. I don't want to be here any more than you want me here. Jack considered their options. They were being manipulated, but perhaps they could turn the situation to their advantage. Ethan might unwittingly provide insight into his father's plans, or even access to information they could use. Fine, Jack said finally. You'll work mornings at the garage and afternoons at the diner. You'll take orders, do what you're told, and maybe learn something about the people your father wants to displace. And if I refuse, Ethan challenged, a flash of his previous arrogance resurfacing. Then you can explain to your father why his plan failed, Martha said sharply. I'm sure he'll be very understanding. The sarcasm wasn't lost on Ethan. He looked at the hostile faces surrounding him and seemed to deflate slightly. Where am I supposed to stay? He asked. There's no hotel in this town, and the apartment above my garage is empty, Martha said reluctantly. Used to be where my son lived before he moved to Phoenix. It's not fancy, but it has a bed and running water. I'll show him, Sarah offered unexpectedly. When Jack looked at her in surprise, she gave him a meaningful glance. We should get to know our new coworker, shouldn't we? As Sarah led Ethan away, Chief moved closer to Jack. You sure about this? Having the enemy's son in our camp? Keep your friends close, Jack replied quietly, and your enemies closer. Ethan might be useful to us whether he intends to be or not. And in the meantime, Doc asked. Jack looked out at Main Street at the small town that had given him purpose and community when he needed it most. At the Liberty Diner where Sarah worked herself to exhaustion to care for her father. At the garage where he had rebuilt his life one engine at a time. In the meantime, he said with quiet determination, we prepare for war. Morning arrived in Redemption Springs with the golden glow of an October sun. Jack Harrington was already in his garage by 6, the smell of motor oil and coffee mingling in the cool air. He moved between vintage vehicles with practiced precision, losing himself in the mechanical puzzles that had always brought him peace. The sound of hesitant footsteps broke his concentration. Ethan Hayes stood in the doorway dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater so impractical for garage work that Jack almost laughed. You're late, Jack said, instead not looking up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. Ethan checked his watch with a frown. It's 6:30. In Redemption Springs, workday starts at 6. Jack finally turned to face the young man. First lesson, punctuality matters when people are counting on you. He tossed Ethan a set of faded coveralls that had once belonged to his son. Put these on. That fancy outfit won't last 5 minutes in here. Ethan held the coveralls between 2 fingers as though they might be contaminated. You can't be serious. Jack merely stared until Ethan reluctantly retreated to the small bathroom to change. When he emerged, the oversized coveralls hanging awkwardly on his slender frame, Jack suppressed a smile. What do you want me to do? Ethan asked, his expression somewhere between defiant and lost. Jack pointed to a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air in the corner. Start by sweeping around that Chevy. Then I'll show you how to properly detail whitewall tires. I have a business degree from Princeton, Ethan muttered, and you want me to sweep floors? Jack picked up a socket wrench and tightened a bolt on the engine before him. Everyone starts somewhere, even Princeton boys with rich daddies. For the next 3 hours, Jack put Ethan through increasingly menial tasks. The young man's initial resentment gave way to resigned compliance as he swept floors, organized toolboxes, and scrubbed white walls until his hands were raw. By mid-morning, Jack relented slightly. He called Ethan over to the 1965 Mustang he was restoring and handed him a polishing cloth. Gentle circular motions, Jack demonstrated on the hood. These old beauties need respect. Can't rush them. Ethan awkwardly mimicked Jack's movements. Why do you bother with these ancient cars? Nobody drives them anymore. Jack ran his hand along the Mustang's perfect lines. Some things are worth preserving just because they're beautiful, because they represent something we're losing. What's that? Ethan asked, more from boredom than genuine interest. Craftsmanship. Identity. Jack's voice grew thoughtful. These machines weren't built to be disposable. They were made to last, to be repaired rather than replaced. There's a lesson in that. Ethan rolled his eyes but continued polishing. The door chimed as Sarah entered, carrying 2 takeout containers from the diner. Her Liberty Diner uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Only the shadows under her eyes revealed her exhaustion. Martha sent lunch, she announced, setting the containers on a workbench. Ethan straightened immediately, self-consciously wiping his dirty hands on his coveralls. How's he doing? Sarah asked Jack, nodding toward Ethan. Survived the morning, Jack replied. Though I'm not sure the white walls will ever recover. Sarah smiled faintly. Your shift at the diner starts at 2. Don't be late. Martha's less forgiving than Jack. As they ate sandwiches on the hood of a partially restored Camaro, Jack noticed Ethan studying Sarah with a puzzled expression. Something on your mind? Jack asked. Ethan hesitated. I don't understand why you're working so hard for your father. The state facility isn't that bad. Lots of people use it. Sarah's knuckles whitened around her sandwich. Have you ever been to one? Well, no, but I have, she interrupted. I did my nursing assistant rotation there during community college. Understaffed, underfunded patients neglected in hallways because there aren't enough beds. Her voice trembled slightly. My father served this country for 20 years. He deserves better. Ethan looked away suddenly, very interested in his sandwich. I wasn't trying to offend you. You didn't have to try, Sarah replied. It comes naturally to you. The uncomfortable silence was broken by the arrival of Chief and Billy, their motorcycles rumbling to a stop outside the garage. Thought we'd check on the new apprentice, Chief announced, his imposing figure filling the doorway. His eyes settled on Ethan with cold assessment. Billy limped in behind him, arthritis evident in his gait despite the brave face he put on it. Kid looks like he's been through a war zone already. Ethan's dirt-smudged face and greasy hands did present a sharp contrast to his usual polished appearance. Something about the young man's disheveled state seemed to soften Chief's expression marginally. You boys have good timing, Jack said. I need to visit Frank at the hospital. Can you watch the Princeton Prodigy while I'm gone? Chief nodded. Consider it on the job training for both of us. Sarah grabbed her bag. I'll come with you, Jack. My shift doesn't start for another hour. As Jack drove his pickup truck towards St. Luke's Hospital, Sarah stared out the window at the passing landscape. Route 66 stretched before them, its faded glory still evident in the vintage roadside attractions and time-worn motels that had survived progress. Do you think it will work? She asked finally, having Ethan work with us. Jack kept his eyes on the road. Probably not the way Maxwell intended. And how's that? Hayes thinks his son will be our weakness. A hostage exchange of sorts. Jack's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. But he might just be our way in instead. Sarah considered this. Ethan doesn't seem like he'd betray his father. People surprise you sometimes, Jack said, especially when they're confronted with the truth they've been sheltered from. At the hospital, they found Frank awake but disoriented. The stroke had affected his speech, leaving him struggling to form words. His right side remained largely immobile, though his left hand moved restlessly across the blanket. Hey there, old friend, Jack said gently, taking the chair beside the bed. Brought your daughter to see you. Frank's eyes brightened as Sarah leaned down to kiss his forehead. He mumbled something that might have been her name. The doctors say you are doing better today, Sarah told him, though Jack could hear the forced optimism in her voice. The medical chart at the foot of the bed told a different story. As Sarah adjusted her father's pillows and checked the monitors with professional efficiency, Frank's eyes found Jack's. Despite the damage from the stroke, Jack recognized the silent question in them. Hayes is in town, Jack confirmed quietly. And yes, he's causing trouble. Frank's left hand clutched suddenly at Jack's sleeve, his agitation evident. He struggled to speak, fragments of words emerging with visible effort. Des, ghost. I know, Jack soothed. We're handling it. Frank's eyes darted to Sarah, then back to Jack. The message was clear. Keep her out of it. Protect her. She knows some of it, Jack admitted. She needed to. Frank's distress was immediate, his heart monitor beeping more rapidly as he tried to sit up. Dad, it's okay, Sarah said, alarmed by his reaction. Please stay calm. The door opened as a nurse entered, drawn by the change in the monitors. I'm going to have to ask you to leave if he gets any more agitated, she said firmly. Jack stood. We're just going. Tell him we'll be back tomorrow. Outside in the corridor, Sarah rounded on Jack. What was that about? Why did mentioning Hayes upset him so much? Because your father has spent 20 years trying to protect you from that part of his life, Jack explained. The classified missions, the cover-up at all of it. I'm not a child anymore, Sarah said. I deserve to know the truth. Jack sighed heavily. The truth is complicated and not entirely mine to tell. As they walked toward the elevator, a distinguished-looking doctor approached them. Dr. Winters was the hospital administrator, a man whose polished appearance and political connections had always made Jack uneasy. Miss Miller, Mr. Harrington, the doctor greeted them with professional cordiality. I was hoping to speak with you about Mr. Miller's situation. Sarah tensed visibly. Has something changed? I'm afraid the insurance issue remains unresolved, Dr. Winters said smoothly. However, I've received a rather generous private offer to cover Mr. Miller's ongoing care. Jack's eyes narrowed. From Maxwell Hayes, I assume? The doctor's surprise was barely concealed. You're well informed. Yes, Mr. Hayes has offered to cover all expenses for the next 6 months, provided certain conditions are met. What conditions? Sarah asked. Dr. Winters consulted his tablet. The sale of classic cars of Route 66 to Hayes Development Corporation and your support at the upcoming town council meeting regarding the Route 66 revitalization project. Blackmail disguised as charity, Jack said flatly. I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement, the doctor replied. Mr. Hayes is offering 3 times the market value for your property, Mr. Harrington. That kind of generosity is rare. It's not generosity when it comes with strings attached, Sarah said. The doctor's professional demeanor cooled. Be that as it may, we'll need a resolution by the end of next week. State regulations don't allow us to maintain patients without clear payment arrangements. After the doctor left, Sarah leaned against the wall, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as she felt. They're not going to let up, she said quietly. Jack placed a steady hand on her shoulder. We're not going to let them win either. When they returned to the garage, they found an unexpected scene. Ethan was bent over the engine of the '57 Chevy, listening intently as Billy explained the intricacies of its fuel injection system. The young man's face was a study in concentration, his initial disdain apparently forgotten in the face of mechanical complexity. Chief nodded to Jack from where he leaned against a workbench. Kid's not completely hopeless, he said quietly. Ask some decent questions about the restoration process. Jack raised an eyebrow. Stockholm Syndrome setting in already. More like genuine curiosity, I think. Chief studied Ethan thoughtfully. He reminds me a little of Frank when we first met him. Smart but sheltered. No real understanding of the world outside his bubble. Sarah checked her watch reluctantly. I need to get to the diner. Ethan, you're supposed to start your shift there in 20 minutes. Ethan looked up, disappointment flashing across his features before he caught himself. Right, the diner. Go clean yourself up, Jack instructed. Can't have you serving customers looking like you crawled through an oil pan. As Ethan disappeared into the bathroom, Billy approached Jack with a troubled expression. Doc called from the VA office. He's been looking into Frank's medical records. And, Jack prompted, Frank's insurance denial didn't come through normal channels. Someone high up intervened personally. Billy's voice lowered. There's a digital signature on the rejection. Guess whose name is on it? Maxwell Hayes, Jack said grimly. Billy nodded. Hayes Development owns the company that manages the insurance approvals for veteran care in this region. Has for about 6 months. Sarah's eyes widened. They've been planning this for that long. Longer probably, Chief interjected. Hayes Development has been buying properties along Route 66 for at least 2 years working west to east. Redemption Springs is one of the last holdouts. The implications hung heavily in the air. This wasn't a random development opportunity. It was a calculated campaign with Redemption Springs specifically targeted. Why here, Sarah wondered. There are dozens of small towns on Route 66 more prosperous than Redemption Springs. Jack exchanged meaningful glances with Chief and Billy. Because we're here, he said simply. This is personal for Hayes. Always has been. After Sarah and Ethan left for their shifts at the diner, Jack retreated to his office with Chief and Billy. From a locked filing cabinet, he removed a worn manila folder. Operation Desert Ghost, he said, spreading the contents across his desk. Everything I managed to salvage before they classified it all. The men leaned over faded photographs, handwritten notes, and partial operation orders. The fragments of a mission that had changed all their lives forever. Richard Hayes was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, Jack recounted. His signature authorized our mission to rescue American hostages held by terrorists. His son Maxwell was his aide fresh out of Harvard and eager to make his mark. Chief pointed to a black and white photograph showing a younger Richard Hayes with several military officers. He wanted the political win of a successful rescue, but when intelligence warned the situation was deteriorating, he got cold feet. By then we were already in position, Billy continued. 18 hours behind enemy lines ready to move. Then the abort order came through. Jack picked up a tattered radio transcript. Frank argued that the hostages would be executed if we pulled out. He was right. Hayes knew it too, but the political risk of a failed mission was too great for him. So Frank made the call, Chief said softly. Went in against orders with half of us backing him up. The intelligence was wrong, Billy added. The building was rigged to explode. We lost 3 men and 2 hostages in the initial blast. Jack's face darkened with the memory. Frank got the remaining hostages out, but he was captured in the process. By the time we extracted him 3 months later, Hayes had already established the official narrative. Frank disobeyed orders. Frank caused the deaths. Frank betrayed his country. And the proof? Chief asked. Jack tapped a sealed envelope. Frank kept the original operation order with Hayes' signature and the abort code that came directly from Hayes' office. He also recorded a deathbed confession from Colonel Simmons, who admitted Hayes ordered him to falsify the after-action reports. Enough to destroy Richard Hayes' political career, Billy observed. And his son's future, Jack added. Maxwell has been grooming himself for politics for years, riding his father's coattails. This scandal would bury them both. Chief leaned back in his chair. So this development project is just a cover. They want to silence us permanently by destroying Redemption Springs and scattering us to the winds. Or buying our silence with generous property deals, Jack confirmed. Either way, the threat to their legacy disappears. Does Sarah know all this? Billy asked. Jack shook his head. Only the basics. Frank never wanted her to know how badly they destroyed him. She needs to understand what we're up against, Chief insisted. Hayes won't play fair, and neither can we. Jack nodded reluctantly. I'll tell her tonight. In the meantime, we need to find out exactly what Hayes is planning for Redemption Springs. The town council meeting is in 5 days, and I'm betting he's already greased enough palms to push his proposal through. The bell over the garage door jingled, announcing a customer. Jack quickly returned the folder to its hiding place before stepping out to the main floor. Doc Anderson stood there, but not alone. A thin, nervous man in an ill-fitting suit accompanied him, clutching a leather briefcase like a lifeline. Jack, this is Harold Weaver, Doc introduced him. He works for Hayes Development. Seems he's having a crisis of conscience. Harold Weaver glanced anxiously toward the windows, as though expecting to be observed. I shouldn't be here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. If Mr. Hayes finds out. He won't, Jack assured him. What can you tell us about the Redemption Springs project? Weaver hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. It's not what people think. Not a normal development. He opened his briefcase with shaking hands and extracted a folder. These are the real plans, not the ones being presented to the town council. Jack spread the documents across a workbench. His expression hardened as he examined architectural renderings and project timelines. They're planning to demolish almost everything, he said grimly. The diner, the garage, most of Main Street, all to be replaced with faux vintage storefronts and tourist attractions. Chief examined a budget spreadsheet. $8 million for land acquisition, $20 million for construction. That's a lot of investment for a small town revitalization. The project isn't about profit, Weaver explained. It's about legacy. Senator Hayes is planning to announce his presidential campaign next year. He wants to showcase his son's development company as a job creator and preserver of American heritage. While destroying the actual heritage, Doc said bitterly. Weaver nodded. There's more. They've already arranged to have the town's historic designation revoked, clearing the way for major construction without preservation restrictions. How? Jack demanded. That designation took years to secure. Senator Hayes chairs the committee that oversees the National Register of Historic Places, Weaver explained. He's calling in favors. And the town council, Billy asked. 3 of the 5 members have already accepted consulting positions with Hayes Development subsidiaries. Weaver's voice dropped even lower. The vote is just a formality. The contracts are already being drafted. Jack studied the man before him. Why are you telling us this? What's your stake? Weaver looked down at his worn shoes. My father owned a garage on Route 66 in Oklahoma. Hayes Development came through 5 years ago with the same promises they're making here. They bought him out, bulldozed the building, and put up a gift shop selling made-in-China souvenirs. His voice broke slightly. My father died 6 months later. The doctor called it heart failure. I call it a broken heart. After Weaver left with promises to provide more information as he could safely obtain it, the 4 veterans gathered around Jack's office to strategize. We need to delay the council vote, Doc suggested. Buy time to organize community opposition. Not enough, Chief countered. Hayes has too much influence. We need leverage. The Desert Ghost files, Billy said. If we threaten to go public. Jack shook his head. That's our nuclear option. Once we play that card, there's no going back, and Hayes might retaliate against Frank before we can protect him. So what's the play? Doc asked. Jack considered their options. We fight on multiple fronts. First, we rally the community, make sure everyone understands what Hayes really has planned. Second, we look for weaknesses in their legal position. And third, he paused, a plan forming. We use their own weapon against them. Meaning, Chief prompted. Ethan Hayes, Jack said. He's our way inside. If we can get him to see what his father and grandfather really are, he might become our most valuable ally. The bell above the garage door chimed again. This time it was Sarah, her Liberty Diner uniform stained and her expression troubled. You need to come to the diner, she said without preamble. Now. What happened? Jack asked, already reaching for his jacket. Ethan collapsed during his shift. He's conscious now, but something's wrong. And he's asking for you. They found Ethan sitting in a booth at the otherwise empty diner, his face pale and drawn. Martha hovered nearby with motherly concern, despite her general dislike for all things Hayes. I'm fine, Ethan insisted as they entered. Just got a little dizzy. You passed out cold while carrying plates to table 7, Martha corrected. Nearly gave Mrs. Peterson a heart attack when you and her meatloaf hit the floor simultaneously. Doc moved forward, professional instincts taking over. Any history of fainting spells, diabetes, heart conditions? No, nothing like that. Ethan avoided their eyes. Probably just low blood sugar or something. Doc checked his pulse and examined his pupils. When did you last eat a proper meal? I had a sandwich at lunch, Ethan said. Before that, the young man shrugged uncomfortably. I don't know, yesterday morning maybe? Sarah exchanged concerned glances with Jack. You haven't been eating, haven't been hungry, Ethan mumbled. Doc continued his examination, lifting Ethan's sleeve to check his blood pressure. As he did, Jack noticed several small, circular bruises on the young man's arm, old ones yellowish and fading. Those look like finger marks, Chief observed quietly, like someone grabbed him hard enough to bruise. Ethan yanked his sleeve down, his face flushing. I said I'm fine. Your father did that, Jack stated rather than asked. It wasn't the first time he'd seen such marks, nor the complicated shame in the eyes of those who carried them. It's not what you think, Ethan said defensively. He has high expectations, that's all. Sometimes I don't meet them. A heavy silence filled the diner. The revelation cast Maxwell Hayes in an even darker light, while simultaneously humanizing his son in a way none of them had expected. Martha, is there any of that meatloaf left? Jack asked, breaking the tension. The boy needs to eat. Martha nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Jack slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him with new understanding. My father used his belt, Jack said conversationally. Made me stand at attention while he did it. Military discipline, he called it. Ethan looked up, surprise evident in his expression. What did you do? Broke his nose when I turned 16. Jack's voice remained level. Told him if he ever raised a hand to me or my mother again, I'd kill him. He believed me. And then what happened? Ethan asked. He drank himself to death by the time I was 20. Jack's eyes held Ethan's. Some men only understand force. Others can learn a better way if given the chance. Martha returned with a generous plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, setting it before Ethan with unexpected gentleness. Eat, she instructed. Nobody thinks clearly on an empty stomach. As Ethan ate, color gradually returned to his face. The others took seats around the diner, forming a loose protective circle that seemed to both comfort and confuse the young man. Why are you being nice to me? He finally asked. I was horrible to Sarah. My father is trying to destroy your businesses. You should hate me. Hate's a luxury for people with simpler lives than ours, Chief said philosophically. Besides, Sarah added, we don't judge people by their worst moments or their family names. That's what places like Redemption Springs are about. Ethan fell silent, contemplating this as he finished his meal. When he spoke again, his voice was hesitant. My father isn't what you think, he said. He genuinely believes these development projects help communities. The tourism, the jobs. Does he know they're demolishing the entire town? Jack asked bluntly. Canceling the historic designation, replacing everything authentic with tourist traps? Ethan's expression revealed his confusion. What are you talking about? The plan is to renovate and enhance, not demolish. Jack nodded to Billy, who retrieved Weaver's documents from the garage and spread them on the table. Ethan's shock appeared genuine as he examined the actual plans. "This can't be right," he insisted. "My father wouldn't approve this." "Maybe not," Jack agreed, "but your grandfather would, and your father has always followed his lead, hasn't he?" Ethan's troubled expression deepened. "What do you know about my grandfather?" Jack exchanged glances with his old comrades, a silent communication born of decades of trust. Making a decision, he turned back to Ethan. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." The evening sky painted Redemption Springs in twilight hues as Jack led Ethan, Sarah, and the last patrol to the town's small cemetery on the outskirts. They walked in silence past weathered headstones until reaching a simple military marker in the newest section. "Captain James Miller," Jack said, gesturing to the stone, "awarded the Silver Star posthumously for valor in combat. The official record says he died of complications from injuries sustained during Operation Desert Ghost." Jack's voice hardened. "The truth is he died because your grandfather denied him proper medical treatment for 3 years after his capture and torture." Ethan stared at the grave in confusion. "My grandfather, he was just a State Department official. He didn't control military medical decisions." "He controlled the narrative," Chief explained. "And the narrative was that Frank Miller disobeyed orders and caused American deaths. Disgraced soldiers don't get priority medical care." "Frank isn't dead," Ethan pointed out. "I saw him in the hospital yesterday." "This is my mother's grave," Sarah said quietly. "She died 5 years ago from cancer. The stress of caring for my father while fighting the VA for proper treatment destroyed her health." The weight of this revelation settled over Ethan. "I don't understand what this has to do with my family." Jack turned to face him directly. "Your grandfather authorized a hostage rescue mission, then aborted it for political reasons after we were already in position. When Frank refused to abandon the hostages, he was captured and tortured for 3 months. Upon his return, your grandfather orchestrated a cover-up that blamed Frank for the failed mission and deaths." "That's not possible," Ethan insisted. "My grandfather is a respected senator, a public servant." "Who built his career on lies," Billy added. "Frank Miller was the scapegoat that protected Richard Hayes's political future." "And my father," Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. "What was his role?" "He was there," Jack said simply, "a young State Department aide witnessing everything. He helped craft the narrative that destroyed Frank's life and protected your grandfather. He's been protecting him ever since." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "You're trying to manipulate me, turn me against my family with ancient history and conspiracy theories." "We have proof," Chief said. "The original operation orders with your grandfather's signature, the falsified reports, testimony from officers who were pressured to lie." "If that's true, why haven't you gone public?" Ethan challenged. "Why wait all these years?" "Because Frank made us promise not to," Sarah answered. "He wanted me to have a normal life free from scandal and bitterness. He sacrificed his reputation and his health to protect me, just like he sacrificed himself to save those hostages." Night had fallen completely now, the cemetery illuminated only by moonlight and the distant glow of street lamps from town. Ethan stared at the grave before him, his worldview visibly crumbling under the weight of unwelcome truths. "I need to think," he said finally. "I need time." "Time is something Frank doesn't have much of," Jack reminded him. "The hospital will transfer him next week unless your father's conditions are met, or unless someone with the Hayes name intervenes directly," Doc suggested meaningfully. Ethan looked up sharply. "What are you asking me to do?" "Nothing dishonorable," Jack assured him. "Just to learn the truth for yourself, and then decide which side you want to be on." They walked back to town in silence, Ethan maintaining physical and emotional distance from the others. At the corner where he would turn toward Martha's apartment above the diner, he paused. "I'll still be at work tomorrow," he said stiffly. "I gave my word to complete the week." Jack nodded. "We'll be there." After Ethan departed, Chief turned to Jack with concern. "You think he'll run straight to his father with all this?" "Possibly," Jack admitted. "But I don't think so. Did you see his face when we mentioned the bruises? There's no love lost between Ethan and his father." "It's still a gamble," Billy warned. "Everything worth fighting for is," Jack replied. The next morning dawned gray and cool autumn, asserting itself more forcefully. Jack arrived at the garage to find Ethan already there waiting outside in the pre-dawn darkness. Punctuality, Jack observed as he unlocked the door. You're learning. Ethan followed him inside, his expression unreadable. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what you told me. Jack nodded as he started the coffee maker. Questions? Too many. Ethan hesitated. Is there really proof, actual documents that would stand up to scrutiny? Yes, Jack confirmed. Frank kept everything despite attempts to destroy the evidence. Military men document everything, even classified operations. Old habits. And my father knows about all this. He's actively covering it up. Jack measured his words carefully. Your father was young when it happened, following orders, protecting his own father. By the time he might have developed the moral courage to speak up, he was too deeply implicated himself. Ethan absorbed this, his internal struggle evident. I need to see the proof, not just hear about it. That can be arranged, Jack said, but I need to know you won't take that information straight to your father. I won't, Ethan promised. Whatever the truth is, I need to see it for myself first. They worked in relative silence for the next hour, Jack teaching Ethan the basics of engine timing on a 1965 Pontiac GTO. The young man proved a quick study, his initial reluctance giving way to genuine interest as the mechanical puzzles engaged his intellect. The morning passed productively until the sound of multiple vehicles approaching disrupted their work. Jack looked up to see 3 black SUVs parking outside, followed by Maxwell Hayes emerging from the lead vehicle. Looks like Daddy's checking up on you, Jack said quietly to Ethan. The young man tensed visibly, wiping his greasy hands on his coveralls with sudden nervousness. Maxwell entered the garage like a man inspecting property. He already owned his expensive suit, an immaculate appearance at odds with the working environment. 2 large men in dark suits flanked him, their posture suggesting private security rather than business associates. Ethan Maxwell acknowledged his son with cool assessment. I see Mr. Harrington is keeping you busy. Yes, sir, Ethan replied automatically, his earlier confidence evaporating in his father's presence. Learning about engine timing and restoration techniques. Maxwell nodded dismissively before turning his attention to Jack. I came to see if you've reconsidered my offer, Mr. Harrington. The town council meeting is only 4 days away now. Still not interested, Jack replied evenly. This place isn't for sale. Everything is for sale at the right price, Maxwell corrected. It's simply a matter of finding the correct motivation. He glanced meaningfully at Ethan. How is Frank Miller doing? Understand his condition has stabilized somewhat. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Jack's expression hardened, but he maintained his composure. Frank's tough, always has been. Indeed. Maxwell straightened his already perfect cuffs. I visited him this morning, actually. Such a tragedy to see a once capable man reduced to such a state. The state facility in Carson City is adequate, I'm told, though perhaps not ideal for his particular needs. Jack's hands curled into fists at his sides. Is there a point to this visit beyond thinly veiled threats? Merely checking on my investment, Maxwell replied smoothly. Ethan represents significant family resources, after all. I wanted to ensure he's being treated appropriately despite the disagreement between us. I'm fine, Father, Ethan said, a note of defiance creeping into his voice. Learning a lot, actually. Maxwell's eyes narrowed slightly at his son's tone. Is that so? Perhaps you'd share these valuable lessons over dinner tonight. I've reserved a table at the Grand in Henderson. We can discuss your experience among the common folk. Ethan glanced uncertainly at Jack, then back to his father. I promised to work the afternoon shift at the diner. I'm sure they can manage without you for one evening, Maxwell said dismissively. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. With that, he turned to leave his security detail, moving in synchronized precision around him. At the door, he paused and looked back at Jack. The offer expires at the council meeting, Harrington. After that, market forces will determine the value of your little museum. I suspect it will be considerably less generous. After Maxwell departed, Ethan seemed to deflate the confident young man of earlier, replaced by someone smaller and uncertain. I should go, he said. If I'm having dinner with my father, I need to get cleaned up. Jack studied him thoughtfully. You don't have to go, you know. Yes, I do. Ethan's voice was resigned. You don't say no to Maxwell Hayes, especially not to his face. Your choice, Jack said. But remember what I told you about standing up for yourself. Some battles you can't avoid, only postpone. Ethan nodded distractedly and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. What if everything you told me is true? He asked, not turning around. What am I supposed to do with that? The right thing, Jack answered as simply, whatever that means to you. After Ethan left, Jack called Chief and arranged for the last patrol to meet at the garage. Within an hour, the four veterans gathered in Jack's office, the door locked against interruptions. Maxwell's making his move, Jack informed them. And Ethan for dinner tonight. I'm betting he's suspicious about what we've told his son. The kid didn't seem ready to betray us, Doc observed. Maybe not intentionally, Chief cautioned. But Maxwell Hayes didn't get where he is by being stupid. He'll read his son, figure out something's changed. Then we need to accelerate our timeline, Jack decided. Doc, contact Harold Weaver. See if he can get us the complete development plans before the council meeting. Billy, check with your contact at the county records office. Find any irregularities in the property transfers Hayes has already completed. What about me? Chief asked. Jack hesitated only briefly. Visit Frank. Tell him we may need to use the Desert Ghost files sooner than planned. See if he's lucid enough to understand and consent. Chief's expression grew grave. You sure about that? Once we play that card, we may not have a choice, Jack interrupted. Hayes is forcing our hand and Frank's running out of time. As the others departed on their assigned tasks, Jack remained in the garage alone. He moved to the 1965 Mustang he'd been restoring for over a year, a project that had kept him sane after Eleanor's death. Running his hand along its perfect lines, he contemplated what might soon be lost. The bell above the door jingled, announcing Sarah's arrival. Her Liberty Diner uniform was rumpled from a long shift, her expression troubled. Ethan didn't show up for work, she said without preamble. His father called him away, Jack explained. Dinner meeting in Henderson. Martha says a group of surveyors was measuring Main Street this afternoon. They had Hayes development badges. Jack nodded grimly. They're moving faster than expected. The council meeting is just a formality now. So what do we do? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Jack considered his options, weighing risks against increasingly limited choices. We fight, he said finally, starting now. The plan came together with military precision over the next hour. Phone calls were made, arrangements set in motion. By sunset, Jack and Sarah had assembled a small group of Redemption Springs business owners in the Liberty Diner after closing hours. Martha provided coffee while Jack outlined what they had learned about Hayes Development's true intentions for their town. The shocked expressions around the room confirmed that many had believed the promises of revitalization and heritage preservation that Hayes had been promoting. They're not enhancing our town, Jack concluded. They're erasing it and replacing it with a sanitized tourist version that looks good in campaign advertisements. But the council has already approved preliminary permits, Henry from the hardware store pointed out. 3 of the 5 members are in Hayes's pocket, which means we need to take our case directly to the public, Sarah suggested. Social media, local news, whatever it takes to expose their real plans. And risk being sued for everything we've got, Martha asked pragmatically. Hayes has lawyers we couldn't afford for 10 minutes. We have something better than lawyers, Jack said quietly. We have the truth about Hayes, about what he did to Frank Miller, about all of it. A hushed silence fell over the group as Jack outlined the story of Operation Desert Ghost and its aftermath. When he finished, the collective outrage was palpable. So what's the play, Jack? Martha asked. How do we use this? Before Jack could answer, the diner door opened. Ethan stood there, still dressed in the expensive suit he'd presumably worn to dinner with his father. His face was pale, a red mark blooming on his cheek. They're coming, he said breathlessly. Tonight, my father knows everything. Jack rose immediately. What happened? He already knew you'd told me about Desert Ghost, Ethan explained. He has someone watching us. When I asked him if it was true, he touched his cheek gingerly. He didn't deny it, just told me I was naive and ordered his security team to keep me in the hotel room while he handled the situation. How did you get away? Sarah asked. Fire escape, Ethan said. I took this from his briefcase before I left. He handed Jack a flash drive. It's the complete development plan and timeline. They're starting demolition the day after the council meeting permits or not. The paperwork will catch up later thanks to my grandfather's connections. Jack pocketed the flash drive. Where's your father now? On his way here with his security team and some contractors, he said something about structural inspections that couldn't wait until morning. Ethan's voice shook slightly. He means to start tonight, Jack, before anyone can organize opposition. The group exchanged alarmed glances. Jack's mind raced through contingencies, evaluating and discarding options with practiced efficiency. Martha, call everyone in town who might support us. Get them down to Main Street as quickly as possible. Henry, contact the sheriff and the fire chief. They're not in Hayes's pocket yet, as far as we know. Jack turned to Sarah. Get to the hospital. If Hayes is making his move tonight, Frank might be in danger too. I'll go with her, Ethan volunteered unexpectedly. Jack studied the young man thoughtfully. The bruise on his cheek was darkening, but something in his eyes had changed. A decision had been made. Why Bassam? Jack asked simply. Because it's the right thing to do, Ethan replied, echoing Jack's earlier words, and because I finally understand what that means. Night had fallen completely over Redemption Springs, the October air crisp with autumn's promise. Jack Harrington stood on Main Street outside his garage, watching as townspeople gathered in growing numbers. Martha's phone calls had mobilized the community with surprising speed. By 10 o'clock, nearly 200 people had assembled, their breath visible in the chilled air, their faces a mixture of determination and uncertainty. The last patrol positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the crowd. Chief stationed himself at the north end of Main Street, where Hayes's convoy would likely enter town. Doc organized a group of younger men into a defensive line in front of the most vulnerable buildings. Billy coordinated with Sheriff Thompson, who had arrived in his official capacity, but made it clear his sympathies lay with the townspeople. Never thought I'd see Redemption Springs at war, Martha said, coming to stand beside Jack. She had exchanged her diner uniform for practical jeans and a heavy jacket, her gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Not a war, Jack corrected her. Just people standing up for what's theirs. Same thing, different scale, Martha replied. You think Hayes will back down when he sees us? Jack shook his head. Men like Maxwell Hayes don't back down. They escalate. As if summoned by his words, headlights appeared at the north end of Main Street. Multiple vehicles moved in procession toward the assembled crowd, their high beams illuminating the scene with harsh white light. Here we go, Jack murmured, stepping forward as the lead SUV stopped 30 yards from the townspeople. Maxwell Hayes emerged flanked by 4 security personnel whose jackets failed to completely conceal their holstered weapons. Behind them, 3 large trucks idled, carrying what appeared to be construction equipment draped with tarps. A welcoming committee, Maxwell observed, his voice carrying in the night air. How quaint. Jack walked forward to meet him, stopping in the neutral ground between the two groups. This isn't happening tonight, Hayes. On the contrary, Maxwell adjusted his cashmere overcoat against the chill. I have permits for emergency structural assessment of several buildings, including that fire hazard you call a garage. My engineers are simply here to ensure public safety. At 10 o'clock at night, Jack challenged, with demolition equipment. Maxwell's smile tightened. Preparation for any necessary emergency actions should the inspections warrant them. He glanced past Jack at the assembled townspeople. I suggest you disperse these people before this situation becomes more complicated. They're not going anywhere, Jack stated flatly. Neither are our businesses. Maxwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. Where is my son, Harrington? What have you done with him? He made his choice, Jack replied. Maybe the first real choice he's ever been allowed to make. Something dangerous flashed in Maxwell's eyes. You've manipulated an impressionable young man with lies about events you barely understood, events that happened before he was even born. Not lies, Jack corrected. Evidence, documentation, the truth about Operation Desert Ghost and what you and your father did to Frank Miller. Ancient history, Maxwell dismissed, and irrelevant to the development opportunities I'm offering this dying town. Nothing irrelevant about it, Sheriff Thompson interjected, stepping forward to join Jack. Especially if that ancient history involves falsifying military reports and obstructing veteran medical care. Maxwell's composure slipped momentarily before he recovered. Sheriff, I suggest you consider your position carefully. This town depends on county funding that could easily be redirected elsewhere. Are you threatening an elected official, Mr. Hayes? The sheriff asked mildly. Because that sounds an awful lot like attempted corruption of a public officer. Maxwell's jaw tightened. He turned back to his security team and nodded sharply. The men spread out in a defensive formation as Maxwell addressed the crowd directly. Citizens of Redemption Springs, he projected his voice with practiced political skill. What you're being told tonight is a distortion of facts designed to block progress and economic opportunity. Hayes Development is offering to revitalize your community with a $30 million investment that will create jobs and restore Route 66 to its former glory. By bulldozing our businesses, Martha called out, by replacing everything authentic with tourist traps. Change requires sacrifice, Maxwell countered smoothly, but the benefits will far outweigh any temporary discomfort. We've seen your real plans, Jack said, holding up the flash drive Ethan had provided. The complete demolition schedule, the structural reports you falsified to justify emergency action. Your entire fraudulent operation is documented right here. For the first time, genuine alarm showed on Maxwell's face. Where did you get that? From someone who still believes the truth matters, Jack replied. Maxwell's expression hardened. He conferred briefly with his security team before addressing Jack again. This is your final opportunity to disperse peacefully. I have legal authorization to proceed with inspections, and these people are obstructing a permitted business operation. Your permits were obtained through fraud and coercion, Jack stated. 3 council members accepting bribes from Hayes Development subsidiaries. The county commissioner already has the documentation. Maxwell's control finally slipped. You self-righteous bastard. You think this pathetic show of small-town solidarity will stop what's coming? I can have eminent domain proceedings initiated with one phone call to my father. Make your call, Jack challenged. Meanwhile, these people will be right here protecting what's theirs. A tense silence fell between them. Maxwell surveyed the determined faces of the townspeople, calculating his options with cold precision. Finally, he turned back to his vehicles. This isn't over, Harrington, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. The convoy of vehicles reversed course and departed, the red glow of their taillights diminishing into the darkness. A cautious cheer went up from the townspeople, quickly tempered by the knowledge that this was merely the first skirmish in a larger battle. Jack gathered the last patrol and the business owners near the Liberty Diner. He'll be back with more legal firepower, and probably actual firepower too. We need to be ready. What about the town council meeting? Henry from the hardware store asked. It's still scheduled for tomorrow night. We'll be there, Jack assured him, with everything we've got. In the meantime, I suggest we organize watches throughout the night. I wouldn't put it past Hayes to try something when we're not looking. As the group dispersed to organize the watch rotations, Doc approached Jack with a concerned expression. Any word from Sarah and Ethan? He asked quietly. Jack checked his phone. Nothing yet. They should have reached the hospital by now. I don't like it, Chief interjected. Hayes retreated too easily. He's not the type to back down from a confrontation unless he has a better angle elsewhere. The realization struck them simultaneously. Jack was already running toward his truck when his phone finally rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. Sarah, are you at the hospital? He answered urgently. Her voice came through, breathless and fearful. Jack, they're trying to move Dad. Right now. Some transfer order signed by the hospital administrator. They have an ambulance waiting to take him to Carson City. Hayes, Jack growled. He's playing both ends. Is Ethan with you? Yes, he's trying to intervene, but they won't listen to him. They say the paperwork is in order. Put him on, Jack ordered, signaling to Chief and Doc to get in the truck. Ethan's voice came on the line, tense but controlled. Jack, they're claiming an insurance directive requires immediate transfer. The administrator won't budge. Use your name, Jack instructed. Tell them Maxwell Hayes personally ordered you to stop the transfer pending his arrival. Buy us 15 minutes. Will that work? Ethan asked. The Hayes name still carries weight, and especially with people on your father's payroll. Just do it. Jack ended the call and gunned the engine, the truck fishtailing slightly as they sped towards St. Luke's Hospital on the edge of town. The drive that normally took 10 minutes was accomplished in less than 5. Jack's military training, enabling him to push the vehicle to its limits without losing control. They arrived to find Sarah and Ethan in a standoff with Dr. Winters and 2 orderlies outside Frank's room. A gurney waited nearby, prepared for patient transfer. This is highly irregular, Dr. Winters was saying as they approached. The transfer orders are properly signed and authorized. And I'm telling you, my father will countermand those orders when he arrives, Ethan insisted, standing his ground in the hospital corridor. Maxwell Hayes does not want this transfer to proceed. Jack strode forward, Chief and Doc flanking him in an instinctive formation honed by years of combat. Their presence alone shifted the power dynamic in the narrow hallway. "What's the rush, Doctor?" Jack asked with dangerous calm. Transferring a critical stroke patient in the middle of the night seems medically questionable. Winters shifted uncomfortably. "The state facility has an open bed tonight. These opportunities don't arise frequently." "Bullshit," Chief said flatly. "This is Hayes trying to secure leverage. The same Hayes who just retreated from a confrontation on Main Street." The doctor's expression confirmed their suspicions. "I have my orders," he said stiffly. "And I have these," Doc countered, producing a stack of papers from his jacket. "Emergency injunction preventing patient transfer without family consent, signed by Judge Holloway 30 minutes ago." "Judge Holloway has no jurisdiction in medical matters." The doctor protested, though, with noticeably less conviction. "He does when medical decisions are being made for non-medical reasons," Doc replied. "I spent 20 years as a combat medic doctor. There's no clinical justification for moving a critical stroke patient in his condition, and we both know it." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Dr. Winters finally relented. "The transfer will be postponed pending review," he conceded reluctantly. "But this decision will be revisited in the morning." "Fair enough," Jack agreed. "By then we'll have additional legal protections in place." After the doctor and orderlies departed, Sarah collapsed into a nearby chair, the stress of the confrontation finally catching up to her. "They would have just taken him," she said quietly, "without proper medical supervision, without adequate preparation. It could have killed him." "That might have been the point," Chief observed grimly. "A convenient tragedy to eliminate both Frank and his evidence." Ethan looked stricken. "My father wouldn't, he couldn't." "Maybe not intentionally," Jack conceded, "but he would have accepted the outcome if it served his purposes." They entered Frank's room to find him awake and agitated, clearly aware of the attempted transfer despite his impaired communication abilities. His left hand clutched at the blanket restlessly while his eyes darted between the visitors. "It's okay, Dad," Sarah soothed, taking his hand. "You're staying right here. We stopped them." Frank's eyes found Jack's a question in them that didn't need verbalization. "Hayes made his move tonight," Jack confirmed. "Tried to start demolition on Main Street under the guise of structural inspections. The town turned out to stop him." Frank's hand squeezed Sarah's, his gaze intense despite his physical limitations. "Time," he managed to say the word slurred but understandable. Jack nodded. "You're right, we're running out of time. The council meeting is tomorrow night and Hayes will have regrouped by then." Frank's eyes shifted to Ethan, studying the young man who stood uncomfortably at the foot of the bed. "Hayes," Frank said, the question implicit. "This is Ethan Hayes," Jack explained. "Maxwell's son. He's chosen to help us." Something like surprise flickered in Frank's eyes, followed by what might have been approval. He motioned weakly for Ethan to come closer. Ethan approached the bed cautiously. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry for what my family has done to you." Frank shook his head slightly, dismissing the apology as unnecessary. With visible effort, he reached toward the drawer of his bedside table, his fingers gesturing insistently. Sarah opened the drawer and found a small key taped to the underside. "Oshamong." "Dad, what's this for?" Frank looked meaningfully at Jack. "Time," he repeated. Jack understood immediately. "The safe deposit box. You're authorizing us to retrieve the Desert Ghost files." Frank nodded, once his expression resolute despite his physical weakness. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked her father. "You always said those documents were a last resort." Frank's gaze remained steady, his decision made. He had protected his daughter from the truth for 20 years, but now that truth might be the only thing that could save her future in the town that had become their home. "I'll go first thing in the morning," Jack promised. "Chief and Doc will stay here tonight to make sure no one tries anything else." As they prepared to leave, Ethan lingered behind. "I'd like to stay too, if that's okay. In case my father tries to contact me." Jack studied the young man thoughtfully. The transformation from entitled rich kid to someone willing to stand against his own family had happened with surprising speed. Jack wondered if the seeds of decency had always been there, merely waiting for the right conditions to grow. "Your choice," Jack said finally. But remember, once Hayes realizes you've truly switched sides, he'll see it as the ultimate betrayal. I know, Ethan replied quietly, but staying silent would be the real betrayal. Of myself. Jack nodded with newfound respect. We'll see you in the morning then. The council meeting is at 7. Outside in the hospital parking lot, Jack and Sarah sat in his truck for a moment, gathering their thoughts before returning to town. Do you think it will be enough? Sarah asked. The Desert Ghost files, Jack sighed heavily. They'll damage Hayes, no question. But men like that have layers of protection. Fall Guy's ready to take the blame. And his father has spent decades building political capital precisely to weather storms like this. Then why risk exposing them at all? Why did my father finally agree? Jack started the engine, the familiar rumble providing a comforting background to his thoughts. Because sometimes the truth is worth the cost, even if it doesn't win the battle. Frank carried this burden for 20 years to protect you. Now he's ready to let it go, whatever the consequences. They drove back toward town in contemplative silence. Main Street remained under the watchful protection of Redemption Springs residents. Small groups patrolling with flashlights, thermoses of coffee passed between them to ward off the night chill. Jack parked in front of his garage and surveyed the scene with complex emotions. Pride in this community that had become his home, concern for the battle that lay ahead, determination to protect what mattered regardless of the odds. Try to get some sleep, he told Sarah. Tomorrow will be a long day. You should rest too, she replied. You can't fight Maxwell Hayes if you're exhausted. Jack managed a small smile. I've fought longer battles on less sleep. Military training. After Sarah departed for her small apartment above the bookstore, Jack retreated to his office in the back of the garage. From the locked filing cabinet, he retrieved the folder containing his own copies of the Desert Ghost documentation. Less complete than what Frank had secured in the safe deposit box, but enough to refresh his memory of details long suppressed. The operation orders signed by then-Deputy Assistant Secretary Richard Hayes authorizing a high-risk extraction of 3 American hostages from a terrorist compound in 1988. The communication logs showing the abort codes sent after the team was already in position. Frank's handwritten after-action report documenting the decision to proceed despite the abort order, when intelligence confirmed the hostages would be executed within hours. The memories came flooding back as Jack reviewed the documents. The searing desert heat, the weight of their equipment as they moved through hostile territory. The explosion that had killed 3 team members when faulty intelligence failed to identify secondary explosions. Frank leading the remaining hostages out while Jack and Chief provided covering fire. The agonizing wait for extraction after Frank was captured. And then the aftermath. The debriefings where their accounts were dismissed. The pressure to accept the official narrative that Frank had disobeyed orders, recklessly causing unnecessary casualties. The gradual disintegration of their unit as men were reassigned, threatened with court-martial, or forced into early retirement. Jack had been lucky. His particular skills had made him valuable enough to be quietly transferred rather than discarded. But Frank had borne the full weight of the cover up. His reputation destroyed his career, ended his health eventually broken by the torture he had endured during captivity. And all because Richard Hayes couldn't risk a failed rescue operation damaging his political aspirations. All because Maxwell Hayes had helped craft a narrative that protected his father at the expense of honorable men. A soft knock at the garage door roused Jack from his dark memories. Billy Cooper stood there, his arthritis more evident in the cool night air. Thought you might want some company, Billy said, holding up a bottle of bourbon. For old time's sake. Jack managed a weary smile and retrieved 2 glasses from his desk drawer. Some conversations required the ritual of shared spirits, a tradition as old as warfare itself. Billy poured 2 fingers of bourbon into each glass and raised his in a silent toast. To absent friends. Jack responded to the unspoken sentiment, clinking his glass against Billy's. The liquor burned pleasantly as Jack swallowed the familiar warmth spreading through his chest. You should be resting that knee instead of standing watch, he observed. Billy shrugged. Pain's just weakness leaving the body, isn't that what they taught us? Military bullshit, Jack replied with a faint smile. Pain's just pain. Always has been. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 old soldiers who had seen enough of the world to appreciate quiet moments between battles. Think we can win this one, Jack? Billy finally asked. Jack considered the question honestly. Not in the traditional sense. Hayes has too much power, too many resources. But sometimes you fight even when victory seems impossible because the alternative is unacceptable. Billy nodded slowly. Like Frank in that compound. He knew the odds, but he went in anyway. Because it was the right thing to do, Jack confirmed. Some choices define us for the rest of our lives. Morning arrived with pale golden light illuminating the frost-covered streets of Redemption Springs. Jack awoke in his office chair, stiff and cold, but surprisingly clear-headed. The bourbon bottle sat half full on his desk, Billy having departed sometime in the night to relieve Chief at the hospital. After a quick shower in the garage's small bathroom, Jack drove to the Redemption Springs First National Bank. The small brick building, dated from 1947, its solid construction a testament to an era when banks were built to reassure customers of their stability. The bank manager, Harold Wilson, was an old friend who had been expecting Jack's visit. Safe deposit box access this early is irregular, Harold noted as he led Jack to the vault. But these are irregular times. Hayes been pressuring you too, Jack asked. Harold's tight smile was answer enough. Let's just say I've been reminded that banking regulations can be interpreted quite flexibly by the right regulatory officials. Inside the vault, Harold used his key in conjunction with Frank's to open the safe deposit box. He then discreetly withdrew, leaving Jack alone with its contents. The metal box contained a sealed manila envelope, thicker and more comprehensive than Jack had expected. Frank had been methodical in his documentation, preserving original communications photographs, medical reports from his captivity, and most damning of all, a sworn affidavit from Colonel James Simmons, recorded shortly before his death from cancer 5 years earlier. Jack secured the envelope inside his jacket and thanked Harold before departing. As he stepped outside the bank, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its engine running, despite the early hour. The vehicle pulled away as soon as Jack emerged, but the message was clear. Hayes was watching. At the hospital, Jack found Chief and Doc maintaining their vigil, while Ethan dozed uncomfortably in a visitor's chair. Sarah had arrived early and was helping Frank with his breakfast, the routine of caregiving, providing some normalcy amid the escalating conflict. Any trouble overnight? Jack asked quietly. Chief shook his head. Quiet as a tomb, too quiet if you ask me. Hayes is regrouping, Doc suggested, planning his next move carefully. The council meeting is his next move, Jack said. 7 o'clock tonight. We need to be prepared. Ethan stirred and sat up, rubbing his neck where it had stiffened from his awkward sleeping position. My father called 3 times during the night, he reported. I didn't answer. Wise choice, Chief commented. You're safer maintaining radio silence until we're ready to move. Jack produced the envelope from inside his jacket. Frank's insurance policy. Everything we need to expose Operation Desert Ghost and the cover-up that followed. Frank watched from his hospital bed, his eyes more alert than they had been in days. Something about the unfolding confrontation had revitalized him, given him purpose beyond mere survival. What's the plan? Sarah asked. Jack laid out the strategy he had developed overnight. We present the evidence at the council meeting with media present. Local reporters, but also contacts from the regional papers and television stations. We make it too public for Hayes to contain. He'll try to discredit the documents, Doc warned, claim they're forgeries or taken out of context. That's why we need Colonel Simmons's affidavit, Jack explained. He was Richard Hayes's military liaison during Desert Ghost. His testimony corroborates everything. And what about my father? Ethan asked quietly. What happens to him when this goes public? Jack met the young man's troubled gaze directly. He'll be implicated in the cover-up. There's no way around that. Ethan nodded slowly, accepting this painful reality. He made his choices, just like I'm making mine. The day passed with tense preparation. Jack, in the last patrol, coordinated with sympathetic town council members, ensuring they understood the evidence that would be presented. Sarah organized community support, rallying business owners and residents to attend the meeting in force. Doc verified the medical implications of Frank's records, preparing to testify about the deliberate neglect of his treatment. By late afternoon, Main Street buzzed with anticipation. News of the confrontation had spread throughout Redemption Springs and neighboring communities. The town hall, a modest brick building at the center of town, would clearly be insufficient for the crowd that was gathering. They're moving the meeting to the high school gymnasium, Martha reported, finding Jack at the garage where he was reviewing his presentation one final time. Sheriff says there are already 200 people waiting, and the meeting doesn't start for 3 hours. Jack nodded absently, his focus on the documents before him. Any sign of Hayes? Not yet, but his advance team is at the school setting up some fancy presentation equipment. All very high-tech. Martha's expression turned serious. Jack, people are saying the governor might show up to support Hayes's project, that this is bigger than just our town. It was always bigger than just our town, Jack replied. This is about power and accountability, about whether the truth still matters when it's inconvenient for powerful men. At 6:30, Jack drove to the hospital to collect Sarah and Ethan. Frank insisted on attending the meeting despite his weakened condition, a determination that no one had the heart to refuse. Doc arranged for a transport wheelchair and portable oxygen, ensuring the journey would be as safe as possible for his old friend. You don't have to do this, Sarah told her father as they prepared to leave. The documents speak for themselves. Frank shook his head stubbornly. Face them. He managed to say the words slurred, but unmistakable. The high school gymnasium was transformed into an impromptu town hall, bleachers filled to capacity with residents and media representatives. At the front, a makeshift stage held tables for the town council members and presenters. Large screens displayed Hayes Development's proposed Route 66 revitalization images, showcasing an idealized version of Redemption Springs that bore little resemblance to the authentic town. Jack wheeled Frank into position near the front, the last patrol forming a protective semicircle around him. Sarah and Ethan sat nearby, both looking nervous but resolute. The atmosphere crackled with tension as 7 o'clock approached. At precisely 7, Maxwell Hayes entered with an entourage of suited associates. He moved with practiced confidence, nodding to acquaintances and projecting an aura of inevitable success. Behind him, to murmurs of surprise from the crowd, came Senator Richard Hayes, distinguished and commanding, despite his 70 years. The elder Hayes walked with the assistance of a silver-handled cane, but his posture remained military straight, his silver hair perfectly styled. His presence elevated the confrontation to a new level, confirming Martha's information about the political significance of the Redemption Springs project. Jack and Richard Hayes locked eyes across the gymnasium, recognition and old animosity flaring between them. The senator's expression betrayed no emotion, but his grip tightened visibly on his cane. Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order, his discomfort evident as he tried to maintain procedural normalcy under extraordinary circumstances. Tonight's agenda concerns the Hayes Development Corporation's proposal for the Route 66 revitalization project, he began. We'll hear first from Mr. Maxwell Hayes, followed by community responses. Maxwell took the stage with polished charisma, his presentation slick and persuasive as he outlined the economic benefits his project would bring to Redemption Springs. Job creation, tourism revenue, infrastructure improvements, all presented with compelling graphics and carefully selected statistics. This isn't merely a development project, he concluded smoothly. It's a vision for preserving America's heritage while creating economic opportunity for future generations. Route 66 represents our shared history, and Hayes Development is committed to honoring that legacy. Applause followed, though notably less enthusiastic than Maxwell might have expected. The residents of Redemption Springs had seen the true plans, understood the reality behind the polished rhetoric. We'll now hear community responses, Mayor Wilson announced. First, Mr. Jack Harrington, representing classic cars of Route 66 and several other Main Street businesses. Jack moved to the podium, the manila envelope in his hand. He placed it carefully on the lectern before addressing the assembled crowd. Maxwell Hayes just spoke about legacy and heritage. Jack began, his voice steady and clear. But the legacy of the Hayes family is built on lies, cover-ups, and the destruction of honorable men who stood in their way. Maxwell rose partially from his seat, but his father placed a restraining hand on his arm, his eyes never leaving Jack. 20 years ago, I served in a classified special operations unit with Frank Miller. Jack continued, gesturing toward his friend in the wheelchair. We were tasked with rescuing American hostages under the authorization of then-Deputy Assistant Secretary Richard Hayes. The crowd murmured as understanding spread that the elderly, distinguished man was the senator himself. When intelligence suggested the mission carried political risk, Secretary Hayes ordered us to abort, knowing the hostages would likely be executed within hours. Jack opened the envelope and held up the original operation orders. We have the documentation to prove it. Operation Desert Ghost, August 1988. Jack proceeded methodically through the evidence, projecting key documents onto the screens that had previously displayed Hayes Development's promotional materials. The operation orders, with Richard Hayes' signature. The abort code transmitted after the team was in position. The medical reports documenting Frank's torture during 3 months of captivity. When Frank Miller chose to rescue those hostages, despite the abort order, he saved 2 American lives at great personal cost. His reward was to be scapegoated by the Hayes family. His career destroyed, his reputation shattered, and his medical care deliberately obstructed to ensure his silence. Jack turned to address Senator Hayes directly. The cover-up was orchestrated at the highest levels of government, continuing to this day. The same pattern of deception is evident in the so-called revitalization project. The real plans which we've distributed to the media show complete demolition of existing structures, cancellation of historic designations, and the replacement of authentic businesses with corporate facsimiles. The gymnasium erupted in angry shouts as residents confronted this confirmation of their fears. Mayor Wilson banged his gavel ineffectively, struggling to restore order as the carefully managed meeting descended into chaos. Through it all, Richard Hayes remained impassive, his political experience evident in his controlled expression. When the noise finally subsided, he rose slowly and approached the podium, his cane tapping rhythmically on the wooden floor. Mr. Harrington presents a compelling narrative. He began, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of a career politician. Unfortunately, it is a narrative constructed from partial information, misunderstood communications, and documents without proper context. The senator's composure was formidable as he methodically countered Jack's presentation, suggesting that Frank Miller had indeed violated direct orders, endangering his team through reckless action. He expressed regret for Frank's subsequent hardships, but maintained that proper protocols had been followed throughout. As for the current development project, he continued smoothly, I assure you that Hayes Development Corporation maintains the highest ethical standards. Any suggestions otherwise are simply the desperate tactics of those resistant to necessary progress. The crowd seemed uncertain now, the senator's authoritative presence and practiced rhetoric creating doubt where Jack's evidence had previously convinced them. This was the power of political skill, honed over decades, the ability to reshape reality through sheer force of personality. Jack felt the momentum slipping away. The truth alone was proving insufficient against such a practiced manipulator of public opinion. Then Frank Miller began to move. With visible effort, he pushed himself upright in his wheelchair. Sarah tried to restrain him, but he shook off her hand with surprising strength. Doc moved to help him stand, supporting Frank as he rose unsteadily to his feet. The gymnasium fell silent as Frank shuffled slowly toward the podium, each step a visible struggle against his stroke-damaged body. Richard Hayes watched his approach with the first flicker of genuine emotion crossing his composed features. When Frank finally reached the microphone, he gripped the podium with his good hand to steady himself. His breathing was labored, his face strained with effort, but his eyes burned with intensity as he faced his old adversary. You left us, Frank said, the words slurred but understandable, each one extracted through sheer force of will. Left hostages to Dean, left men behind. The simple accusation, delivered with such painful effort, carried more weight than all the documentation Jack had presented. This was no complex conspiracy theory, but the raw truth from a man who had suffered the consequences directly. You ordered abort, Frank continued, each word a victory against his impaired speech. To protect your career. American lives for political ambition. The senator's composure finally cracked. You disobeyed a direct order, Miller. The chain of command that exists for a reason. Individual soldiers don't get to decide which orders to follow. When orders wrong, Frank replied. His damaged face contorted with the effort of speaking, duty to disobey. A murmur ran through the crowd as the confrontation distilled to its essence. No political spin could fully obscure the moral clarity of Frank's position. The documentation provided context, but Frank's presence, his broken body and determined spirit, provided the emotional truth that resonated more deeply. Richard Hayes seemed to recognize the shifting tide. He glanced at his son, a silent communication passing between them before he addressed Frank again. Your conviction is admirable, Mr. Miller, misguided though it may be. However, the past cannot be changed, and redemption's spring still faces the economic realities of the present. The development will proceed with or without local approval. Ethan Hayes chose this moment to step forward, moving to stand beside Frank at the podium. The symbolism was lost on no one, the Hayes heir apparent, standing with the man his family had wronged. The development will not proceed, Ethan stated clearly into the microphone. Not in its current form, not with its current leadership. Maxwell half rose from his seat. Ethan, you don't have the authority to... As of this morning, I have exactly the authority I need, Ethan interrupted, producing a document from his jacket. As a major shareholder in Hayes Development through my trust fund, I've filed an injunction against the Redemption Springs project pending a full board review of the methodologies employed. He turned to face his father and grandfather directly. I've also submitted all documentation regarding Operation Desert Ghost and subsequent insurance irregularities to the Senate Ethics Committee, the Veterans Affairs Inspector General, and selected media outlets. The gymnasium erupted again, this time with cheers from the residents and shouted questions from reporters. Through the chaos, Jack watched the Hayes men confer urgently, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under this unexpected betrayal from within. Frank, his strength finally failing, began to collapse. Jack and Doc moved quickly to support him, easing him back into the wheelchair as Sarah rushed forward with the portable oxygen. You did it, Jack told his old friend quietly. You faced them down after all these years. Frank managed a small nod, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, but satisfaction in his eyes. The confrontation he had avoided for 20 years had finally occurred, and he had found the strength to speak his truth directly to the man who had wronged him. The meeting dissolved into controlled chaos as reporters pressed forward with questions, council members conferred urgently, and the Hayes entourage attempted to manage the unfolding public relations disaster. Through it all, Jack remained beside Frank, the last patrol forming a protective barrier against the surging crowd. Ethan made his way to them, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. They're leaving, he reported. My father and grandfather. They're trying to contain the damage, but it's already spreading beyond their control. What happens now? Sarah asked, still attending to her father's oxygen levels with professional care. Legally, it's complicated, Ethan admitted. The development is suspended pending board review, which buys time. My trust fund shares give me leverage, but not control. There will be investigations, counter-accusations, probably lawsuits. And personally, Jack asked, studying the young man who had sacrificed his family relationships for a principle. Ethan's expression was resolute, despite his obvious emotional turmoil. I've burned bridges that can't be rebuilt, but I can live with that decision better than I could live with the alternative. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity to Redemption Springs. National media descended on the small town as the Operation Desert Ghost revelations expanded into a major political scandal. Senator Hayes issued a carefully worded statement announcing his withdrawal from presidential consideration for health reasons, while his legal team worked frantically to contain the damage. Maxwell Hayes disappeared from public view entirely, reportedly seeking treatment for exhaustion at an exclusive facility in Arizona. Hayes Development Corporation stock plummeted as investors reacted to both the scandal and Ethan's very public break with company leadership. For Redemption Springs itself, the outcome remained uncertain. The development was suspended but not canceled entirely. The town council, with 3 members facing ethics investigations for their connections to Hayes Development, found itself paralyzed at a crucial moment. 1 week after the confrontation, Jack sat with Frank on the porch of the hospital's rehabilitation wing. Frank's condition had stabilized his determination to face his accusers, seemingly providing a new will to recover. His speech remained impaired, but his comprehension and awareness were sharper than they had been in months. Doctor says you might be released to outpatient care next week, Jack told him. Sarah's already preparing the house. Frank nodded, watching a group of birds gather on the lawn before them. The simple pleasure of sunlight and fresh air seemed enough for him today. Worth it? Jack asked quietly, the question encompassing everything they had risked and endured. Frank considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. Truth matters, he managed to say. Always. Jack couldn't argue with that fundamental belief. It had guided their military service, defined their response to the Desert Ghost disaster, and ultimately brought them to this moment of qualified victory against forces that had seemed insurmountable. That afternoon, Jack returned to his garage to find Ethan examining the engine of the 1965 Mustang with genuine interest. The young man had remained in Redemption Springs despite numerous opportunities to leave sleeping in Martha's apartment and continuing to work shifts at both the garage and diner. "She's almost ready for paint," Jack observed, running his hand along the Mustang's flawless bodywork. Ethan nodded appreciatively. "You've done amazing work. I never understood the appeal of restoration before, but now I see it. Taking something broken and making it whole again, preserving what matters." "There's a metaphor in there somewhere," Jack replied with a small smile. They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, the routine of mechanical tasks, providing structure and purpose amid the uncertainty that surrounded them. Jack found himself impressed by how quickly Ethan had developed genuine skill with tools that would have been foreign to him just weeks earlier. "I've been thinking about the development," Ethan said, finally wiping grease from his hands. "What it could be if done right." "Meaning," Jack prompted. "Real restoration instead of demolition. Genuine preservation instead of fake nostalgia." Ethan's eyes lit with emerging passion. "Route 66 deserves authentic stewardship, not corporate exploitation. Places like your garage, the diner, they're the real heritage worth protecting." Jack studied the young man thoughtfully. "Sounds like you found a cause." "Maybe I have," Ethan acknowledged. "The Hayes Development Board is in disarray with my father's absence. There's an opening to redirect the company's approach entirely." "Ambitious," Jack observed. "Your father won't take that challenge lying down once he recovers from his exhaustion." "Probably not," Ethan agreed. "But I'm a Hayes too, with all the stubborn determination that implies. Just channeled in a different direction." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, her expression brighter than it had been in weeks. "Dad's latest scans show improvement," she announced. "The neurologist thinks he might regain up to 70% of his function with proper rehabilitation." "That's great news," Jack said warmly. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The VA has reversed their denial of his insurance claims. Full coverage retroactive to the original filing date. All his treatments will be covered going forward." Jack exchanged glances with Ethan, understanding the young man had likely influenced this development through his family connections, limited though they might now be. "What about the town council?" Jack asked. "Any decision on the development proposal?" Sarah's smile widened. "They just voted unanimously to reject Hayes Development's current plan and establish a community oversight committee for any future Route 66 projects. Martha's been appointed chair." "Community oversight," Ethan mused. "That's actually a brilliant approach, ensuring authentic preservation while allowing for necessary economic growth." "You sound like you have ideas," Sarah observed. "A few," Ethan admitted, "if the community would be willing to hear them." 1 year later, Redemption Springs celebrated the grand reopening of Liberty Diner, expanded now to include an adjacent Route 66 museum featuring Jack's most impressive classic car restorations. The renovation had preserved the diner's authentic character while modernizing its infrastructure, a model for the authentic Route 66 approach that had replaced Hayes Development's original concept. Frank Miller attended the ceremony in his wheelchair, his speech still impaired, but his mind clear and engaged. The Operation Desert Ghost revelations had ultimately led to formal recognition of his actions, with the Secretary of Defense personally presenting him with the long-delayed Silver Star for valor that his actions had warranted. Senator Richard Hayes had announced his retirement from politics, his legacy tarnished but not entirely destroyed by careful damage control and strategic concessions. Maxwell Hayes had emerged from seclusion to find his company transformed under a new board majority, influenced by his son's vision, his authority diminished but not eliminated entirely. As for Ethan, he had found an unexpected home in Redemption Springs, applying his business education and family connections to a genuine preservation effort along Route 66. The breach with his family remained, though tentative communications had begun in recent months, suggesting the possibility of eventual reconciliation on new terms. Veterans Haven, as the expanded diner complex was now known quickly, became a popular stop for travelers along Route 66. The last patrol often gathered there, sharing stories with visitors and explaining the history of the vehicles Jack had so lovingly restored. On quiet evenings, Jack would sometimes sit on the diner's porch with Frank, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors above Route 66. Two old soldiers who had finally won their longest battle, not through force of arms, but through the enduring power of truth and the courage to stand firm against seemingly insurmountable odds. "Worth it?" Jack would sometimes ask, echoing his question from the hospital porch a year earlier. And Frank, with the hard-won wisdom of a man who had lost nearly everything but his honor, would nod and reply simply, always.